We'll resume the Senate Finance and Public Administration Legislation Committee supplementary budget estimates, where we're examining the finance portfolio. We're moving on to outcome 2. And so I will go to Senator Gallagher.
Thank you, Chair. This is under 2.1 and it relates to the NBN. There's the right officers at the table. Thank you.
No, that's right.
All right. So for the purposes of governance structures, what is NBN Co classified as?
It's a government business enterprise. I assume that your question is to what extent the Commonwealth contributions to the NBN are classified, for accounting purposes in the budget, obviously the government has limited its equity contribution to NBN to $29.5 billion all up. So that is obviously reflected in the appropriate way on the balance sheet, though it doesn't hit our underlying cash balance, and somebody will go into a bit more detail in relation to all of that if you're interested.
Well, I'm not sure if we have time tonight. My questions don't relate to that, actually. They relate to it under the governance section of 2.1. Do the Commonwealth Government Business Enterprise Governance and Oversight Guidelines apply to NBN
Yes.
Co? Okay. So under those guidelines, section 2.5 requires GBEs in undertaking their business avoid activities that could give rise to questions about their political impartiality.
I think I know where you're going, and you might recall that we actually...
You were wrong just before,
well,
but anyway,
but
I've given you a bit more info.
The reason I think I know where you're going is because a number of opposition senators asked questions about this of Senator Fifield and myself in Senate question time. I assume that you're referring to the work that the NBN did to prudently assess the cost of various options that might be pursued in order to roll out, to ensure that the NBN rollout is as efficient, as effective as possible, at the lowest possible cost for taxpayers and for the customers of NBN, and that we deliver it in as timely a fashion as possible. I assume that that's what you rely. Because we have traversed this issue in Senate question time last week, actually.
Yeah, so maybe if I could just go through my questions and we can get through this pretty quickly. But can you, in relation to section 2.5, can you confirm that NBN Co has to comply with that requirement?
Well, the guidelines apply, the relevant guidelines for government business enterprises apply to NBN, yes.
Okay, so the answer to that is yes. So there is a joint letter from Ministers Turnbull and Cormann to the chair of NBN Co of the 28th of
The reason you've got
April.
that is because we've tabled it, yep.
Ms Holton, are you aware of the letter?
You would be.
Of the letter from...
Sorry, which one? Sorry, Senator.
The letter to the chair of the NBN Co from Ministers Turnbull and Cormann.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yep.
So if the...
The way this process works, just to assist you, that whenever I write to any of the government business enterprises in which I'm a shareholder minister, I get separate advice from my department in relation to any such correspondence. And of course, if I am a joint shareholder minister, whether that be your former communications minister Turnbull, or whether that will be the deputy prime minister in relation to the ARTC, or before I put my signature on the letter, I get separate advice from my department, which obviously goes through the usual and proper process before it gets to me.
Okay, so in the letter of the 28th of April, the Chair was asked for a counterfactual that is essentially a distorted version of Labor's NBN plan known as Scenario 1.5.
Well, that is your
which-
characterisation, and as you would know from my answer in Senate in Senate question time, I don't accept that characterisation. The government doesn't accept that characterisation. The former Communications Minister, Mr. Turnbull, and I asked the NBN Co in an abundance of caution to ensure that all relevant and appropriate options were properly assessed to ensure that we could be satisfied that we were on the right track. And of course we are satisfied that we are on the right track. And I think there was a very telling editorial in the Australian Financial Review, actually, the day that you sought to make an issue of this in Senate question time, which reminded everyone that Labor promised the NBN its original iteration at a $4.7 billion cost, and of course it very quickly went into excess of 60, 70 billion dollars. That's certainly the number that we got to when we came into government. And since we came into government, we've worked very hard to ensure that the funding base for NBN and that sort of the project as a whole could be delivered from where we inherited it at the lowest possible cost in the fastest possible, well, in a faster way than what we inherited.
So, in terms of oversight of the business enterprise governance and oversight guidelines, does finance have oversight of that?
Of what,
Of,
sorry?
of making sure the guidelines are adhered to?
Well, the guidelines apply to all government business enterprises, and so to the extent that I am a shareholder minister in any government business enterprise, then in providing advice to me, obviously the Department of Finance takes the guidelines into account, provides advice to me consistent with what the requirement in any relevant guidelines would be, in as far as they apply to a particular set of circumstances.
So the request to the NBN chair, which was for the counterfactual of, I'm not sure what words are offending you in it, but scenario
you're characterising it as a distorted
1.5.
version of Labor's policy.
Okay, so counterfactual known as scenario 1.5.
You might remember that this is a letter that was sent in on the 28th of April 2015. Yeah. I didn't realise that Labor asserted that by then Labor had released an alternative policy. I thought that was a more recent development, unless you are sort of accusing us of crystal ball gazing and preemptively sort of distorting something that we didn't know existed. We didn't think that you'd want to go back to your discredited track record when it came
My
to
questions
the NBN.
relate to the letter that was written to the NBN co-chair.
On the 28th of April 2015.
Doesn't the content of the letter give rise to questions about NBN Co's political impartiality as required under Section 2.5?
Absolutely and categorically no.
So why would you ask for it? And here is the statement. The FTTP NBN is an important counterfactual to the multi-technology mix MTM rollout recommended by NBN co-management in the strategic review in the government in December 2013 and currently being deployed. And then you went on to then say, while it is up to the company to determine the basis for its estimate of an FTTP rollout, it must be that a scenario 1.5 approach aligns most closely with reality. And then you then go on to say, particularly while any updated cost estimate in the penultimate paragraph for an FTTP rollout scenario is not expected to replicate the rigour of NBN Co's business plan for the MTM rollout, it should be sufficiently robust and detailed that the company is prepared to stand behind its credibility and comparison of an FTTP and MTM costs.
Well, I don't know how you did it.
The only conclusion you could come
that is not
to
true.
that is that you've sought a counterfactual.
That
correct?
is not true.
You've sought a counterfactual.
Well, let me
Is that correct?
Well, let me answer the question. Let me answer the question. You're trying to assert something here.
It only works if a question is put and then a response is given and respect is paid.
Well,
you're coming to the conclusion of your
answer the question.
So I would ask Senator Ludwig to conclude, and then.
Well, he asked. There was a question mark after correct question mark. So
he continued. So have you concluded your question?
Well, I did ask. It is a counterfactual.
well, what
That
it
is
is.
correct.
Well, unlike the previous government, as part of providing good and effective government, when we consider the deployment of public money, when we consider the deployment of taxpayers' money, we ensure that all relevant options are considered and compared to each other. I mean, that is how you ensure prudent decision making. And obviously, there is a particular alternative scenario that is being put forward as an alternative option, and it was important that the option that we were pursuing was properly tested and benchmarked and assessed against a possible alternative option. Now, there is nothing unusual about that. We do this in government every day. When we prepare ourselves to make decisions on various issues, challenges, opportunities, we consider various options on the best way before we make a decision on the best way forward. What we asked NBN Co to do here is exactly that, to essentially benchmark their determined and identified way forward against an alternative option. That is good decision making. That is good government. That is good management for a government business enterprise to do so, particularly when so much taxpayers' money is at stake. And I'll just remind you again, when Labor prepared the business plan on the back of a beer coaster in an airplane in an airplane ride when former Prime Minister Rudd and former Communications Minister Senator Conroy were travelling, I don't know from where to where, but they wrote up the NBN core business plan on a beer coaster. It was meant to cost $4.7 billion, and it went well in excess of $50 billion by the time it lost government.
Very short question I asked.
So, well, the answer is very simple.
All night.
There's nothing inappropriate about asking NBN Co to assess an alternative option to the preferred way forward.
I must say, Minister, thank you for that comprehensive answer, but it would facilitate the lengthy demands on our program if we can keep our questions tight and our answers as comprehensive
we're going
and tight
back
as
over
possible.
ground that was traversed in Senate question time. There's a political smear being attempted here, and obviously I'm going to resist that on behalf of the government.
And good on you for resisting any smears, but let's get to questions.
I haven't
and not
got to a
smears.
smear yet.
No, so let's just continue with questions.
So, wouldn't the Department of Finance be the relevant department to do that analysis that you have requested, rather than to ask a government business enterprise to do your dirty work?
Well, again, I mean, so, Chair, I don't know how a reference to dirty work for the government is not an attempt at a political smear by Senator Ludwig.
Well,
I completely reject the premise of the question. I completely reject the assertion that is made there. The Finance Department provides advice to me as the shareholder minister, one of the two shareholder ministers in NBN Co. NBN Co is best equipped to test its business plan against an appropriate alternative option to ensure this, as part of prudent decision making. I mean, we are the shareholders on behalf of the taxpayers. We are there to ensure that no more money is going to be wasted as a result of the bad decisions that were made in this area by the previous government. So it is important to ensure that there's a proper analysis of alternative ways forward, and that confirms for us that the business plan that NBN Co has developed and is implementing is the appropriate business plan for NBN Co at this point in time.
So does that mean that you've got doubts about the multi-technology mix?
No, it doesn't mean that at all.
Well, hang on, I haven't finished the question.
Well, you've asked the question. Doesn't mean that at all.
No, but there is in the context of putting a question, there is allowed to be a comma or a pause or some other semicolon before completing it. So I just ask that we listen and then we respond,
can I put it to you that what you're saying is if you require a counterfactual, then you have some doubt as to whether your choice of the multi-technology and mix rollout is correct.
Well, we don't.
You are now seeking to, in your explanation of the counterfactual, is to test whether or not your MTM was any good.
Well, your characterisation again is wrong. We do not have any doubt about the path that we've chosen, which is
well, then why would you do a counterfactual?
Because the reason we have confidence in the pathway that we have chosen is because we have asked for it to be tested against a potential alternative option. And of course, it is only appropriate for us in this sort of space to keep an open mind. As circumstances change, you've got to keep assessing the option that you've chosen as opposed to an alternative option that might be available to ensure that you continue to be on the right path. There's nothing unusual, nothing inappropriate about this. This is just a sound basis for decision making in relation to a multi-billion dollar item of expenditure for the Commonwealth.
But if that was the case, why would you then say in the letter that you don't expect them to replicate the rigour of NBN Co's business plan for the MTM rollout? In other words, you're not going to compare apples with apples or oranges with oranges. You're then going to compare apples and lemons.
Again, that's
that
not right. That
does not make sense.
No, well, it does make sense. And if you listen carefully to my answer, obviously we are very confident about the pathway that we have chosen when it comes to the implementation of the NBN business plan. However, it was important to us to have an alternative option assessed. If that initial assessment, not to the same level of rigour obviously as developing the business plan, but if that had identified any issues or if that had identified any cause for us to look into matters more deeply, then we would have wanted to deploy the necessary resources to do so. But by way of an initial assessment, which was robust enough to continue to inform our decision making, but which wasn't so resource intensive as to waste excessive resources, then we believe that this was the appropriate way of doing so.
So did the department give any advice about the issue that we've raised about a GBE performing this counterfactual work?
Sorry, I don't actually, there was a negative in there, so I don't actually understand your question, Senator.
Well, did you provide any advice about this letter to the Minister?
We'll have to check our records.
You can take that on notice.
We certainly can.
And if you did, can you make it available to the committee, please?
Well, Senator, no, you know that we don't. We'll have to take it.
We'll consider,
exactly.
consistent with the relevant Senate standing order as to whether or not any such advice can be released or whether there is a public interest immunity exemption that would apply.
Exactly.
And secondly, did you provide the Minister, did the department provide the Minister with any advice about the question of political impartiality of a GBE answering this question that was put by the Minister?
We'll take that on notice, Senator.
I'll pause there. Did you want to follow up anything else?
So
then, thirdly, are you able to say why in section 1.7 of the guidelines, GBEs are meant to maintain the highest standard of integrity, accountability and responsibility, that would be consistent with asking for a counterfactual?
Well, I can't see why that would not be consistent. I absolutely assert that NBN does maintain those appropriately high standards consistent with the guidelines.
And so did the department provide any advice as to whether or not this letter would
we've already taken this on notice.
I want to make sure I don't miss out on any advice, any advice in respect of whether it would breach section 1.7 of the guidelines, in that it would not maintain the highest standard of integrity and accountability.
Let me just say that if I had received... we've already taken this on notice, and I understand the reasons and why you're sort of trying to dwell on this, but if I had been given such advice, you can rest assured that I wouldn't have signed the letter. But we have taken on notice, whether advice was provided in the context of this letter having been sent by then Communications Minister Turnbull and myself, and we've also undertaken to assess whether or not that advice, if it does exist, can be released, or whether there is a relevant public interest immunity exemption that would apply, which would prevent its release in full or in part. So we'll get back to you.
I'm sure you're familiar with the Corman order.
Well, I think it's a very good order, and
you.
I always comply with it.
And then can the department advise the committee as to who originally drafted the letter? Was it the communications or finance that drafted the letter?
We'll have to take that on
Take
notice.
it on notice, yeah.
And particularly advise who drafted the section requested an updated cost estimate for a fibre to
Well, I don't know that we'll be able to, I mean, I do know
I can
that we'll
ask
be
the
able...
question
yeah.
and then
We
you
will
can take
consider
it
on
on
notice
Yeah.
and
what
you
we
can
can
determine
provide.
whether or not you can
exactly,
provide it.
Exactly. We'll have a look at it, Senator.
And finally, I've lost my train. I'm happy to move on, I think. Yeah.